Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 34. This is a show where two gentlemen get to sit down and talk about Anglicans and Anglican news and Anglican events. And gosh, if it doesn't start with an Anglican, we really don't talk about it, do we, George?
Yes, we do.
What boring lives we live. I'm Kevin Coulson.
And I'm George Conger. And today is March 27th, 2012.
George, let's go on with Today in History.
Tonight, the plant looms like a pale ghost, the specter of potential meltdown hanging over this community. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission says the core has been extensively damaged. The expert sent by President Carter says a bubble of radioactive xenon gas inside that reactor is getting bigger. 30 degrees. The question is, how fast can the temperature inside the reactor be brought down 30 degrees to cold shutdown? If too much gas builds up inside, it'll push down the water, expose the nuclear fuel rods, then it could happen. What would meltdown mean?
The most likely meltdown would not result in early fatalities. It would result in exposure to the public that cause latent cancers and land contamination and
how far?
And probably resulting in economic losses of $1 billion or so.
How far?
But what are the chances of this happening?
I think they're very remote.
George, let's go on with Today in History. Today in History, we almost had a meltdown at the 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor in Pennsylvania. For a period of like 7 days, we didn't know if the reactor was melting down or not because we didn't understand the numbers the reactor was giving to the engineers locked in the control room. This is during the Cold War. The movie China Syndrome come out, and Hollywood was trying to give us fear of nuclear power, and we should have had a general fear and respect for it. Chernobyl taught us why, but 3 Mile Island was unique in many different respects. The first is you were there.
I survived 3 Mile Island. I was a student at a boys' boarding school within the radius where there was the warning, evacuation warning was given. And the school, about 500 boys, contacted all the parents and said, you know, if you want to get your kids, now's the time to do it. And my dad from Florida said, oh, don't worry about it, he'll be fine. So I stayed there. Unfortunately, the reactor didn't sink all the way to China, causing a terrible catastrophe.
No,
but I'm alive.
You're alive, and we can talk about this today because we're still having the effects of a fear of radiation to the state. We have obviously an oil crisis. Every week our gas prices go up. Even though we do have more oil here in America than ever before, other countries like Japan have decided to turn off the nuclear reactors because of fear.
Yes, and there's an Anglican angle to all this. The Archbishop of Japan, Nathaniel Uematsu, released a pastoral letter 1 year after the tidal wave, the tsunami, that wrecked the Fukushima reactor, and he called upon the Japanese government to shut down all the nuclear power plants in the country because nuclear power was just not safe in earthquake-prone Japan. And before the Japanese government has basically been going ahead and doing this because public opinion has really turned against nuclear power in Japan. Before this tidal wave, there were 54 reactors in operation. Today, there's only one.
And in the same respect, 3 Mile Island stopped nuclear proliferation of power plants here in America. Before 3 Mile Island, there were plans for 6 more plants to be made within the next 10 years. After 3 Mile Island, all plant operations of new plants had stopped completely. And we've been using fossil fuels and coal and oil to make up for that lack of nuclear power.
One of the problems in Japan is that a third of their generation capacity is now gone. So they have to replace that with fossil fuels, natural gas, coal, and that's causing a worldwide price hike among all the other factors that are taking place in the energy market.
It's ironic. We got plenty of oil, plenty of power, plenty of nuclear capabilities, but no plenty of brains. George, in our first story, we're going to return to a topic that you and I talk about a lot. It's basically Millennium Development Goals and Western financial influence in African cultures. And one of the problems the Africans have is they're dirt poor. They live in a poverty level we call third world, and basically every meal to them is a gift. And we don't really have that understanding here in America. My children don't understand third world poverty, or my neighbors don't, because they have not been to Africa like you and I have been. Poverty over there is a disease. And one of the ways people try to treat that disease is through giving money and presenting Millennium Development Goals, and through social activism. And there's a lot of good in that, but for Christians, there's a call to go a step further. And the Archbishop of Kenya recently wrote a letter addressing this.
Yes, Eliud Wabakula released a pastoral letter for Lent, basically chastising those Africans, those Christians, who believe that the Millennium Development Goals should be the most important mission of the Church. Now, the Episcopal Church has been pushing the MDGs, as they're called, as the big thing. This is what the Church is all about. And we may roll our eyes at that, but in Africa, there are groups that are also saying this. They're getting money from the West to fund relief organizations, and therefore they think that's what the Church should do. But Archbishop Wabakula says that is idolatry. You only come, that the path to salvation is justification by faith in Jesus Christ. You cannot earn your way to faith. You cannot buy it. You cannot, by supporting the Millennium Development Goals, advance your salvation 1 inch. It's entirely faith in Christ.
And it's a unique perspective, because that is the biblical.
It's a Christian perspective.
Yeah, it's the biblical perspective. The New Testament perspective is we are here to make disciples of Christ. Peter was told by Jesus, "Feed my sheep," as part of the building of the church. He also told his disciples to go to all nations and make disciples. And these sometimes seem like competing ideas, and yet in many terms are the exact same.
Now, there's more that is going on here than just the Archbishop writing a letter criticizing the Episcopal Church's MDG goal fanaticism. There is actually a struggle right now for the soul of the African Church.
Sure.
CAPA, the Council of Anglican Provinces of Africa, has put out, its staff, which is funded by the West, put out a document saying, here's the direction of the African Church, and we're going to take as our motto John 10:10, where Jesus says, I'll read it to you, that you may have life and have it to the full. I have come so that you may have life and have it to the full. The African Church is interpreting that in CAPA's eyes to mean quality of life. And Archbishop Wabakula is saying, no, that's eternal life. And there's a fight over what the role of the church might be. Can money buy salvation, or does grace alone buy salvation?
And I guess you'd have to actually go back to the first century with Christ. Did Christ come to be a political figure and change the politics of the day? Or did he come to save the people of the day? George, in our next story, we're going to talk about the chicken and the egg. And it's kind of neat that we get to banter about this, but we get to do this because of Eastern Oregon. The diocese there says, listen, this whole thing about requiring baptism before you come to the Eucharist, it's really hurting our ability to bring new people into the church. Largely, we live in a pagan society in Eastern Oregon, and there aren't baptized people to bring into the church, and so they're not coming. And if we could just get rid of that, they have to believe in Christ, and get rid of that be baptized part, we could have everybody come to our church. Is this going to work, George?
No.
No.
As you say, the Diocese of Eastern Oregon is going to petition the General Convention of the Episcopal Church to remove the constitutional requirement of baptism before Eucharist. And they are doing so for two reasons. One, they believe it is an effective marketing tool. That if we don't require people to be Christian before they come to Holy Communion, more people will come. I guess the prospect of free booze is pretty strong in Eastern Oregon. And they also believe that theologically we need to be inclusive of all people in our faith, even those who don't have faith, as evidenced by baptism.
Yeah, there's a whole thing to the Eucharist, and the Eucharist has evolved over time. The Roman Catholics were and are under the distinct impression that Jesus is absolutely there in transubstantiation. I can't even say the word. It's one of those complicated, it must come from Latin words. And over time, the Anglicans said, well, it's not quite that, but we're not quite sure what it is. But now the Eastern Oregons are going even further and saying, well, you don't even have to be a Christian to be part of the Eucharist. We know through faith that a Christian must be baptized and accept Jesus as the Lord and Savior to even be part of the church.
Well, what Eastern Oregon is essentially saying is that there's nothing sacred or holy about the Eucharist itself. What the argument that's being put forward, I think, is well-intentioned. They want more people to come and participate in the life of the church. But there's a difference between the sacred and the profane. And when you have the Eucharist become a marketing tool rather than a celebration of the unity of the faith, of being made one with God himself by partaking of his body and blood, and you're changing that into, hey, we can get more bodies into the church, you're basically desacralizing what it means to receive the Eucharist. It's no longer a sacrament.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously this is one of the things instituted by Jesus for the church, and it's something that we are to do every time that we meet together. It's a call to be part of this Christian thing, and it's lasted absolutely through the centuries and centuries in its existence in the brotherhood of our faith.
Now, this is one of these funny things that I don't think there's any chance this will pass the Episcopal Church's General Convention. This seems to be something that's sort of big out west in California and Oregon and places like that, whereas the liberal dioceses of the Northeast, New York and Connecticut, they are no way, no how going to let this through on their watch.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's going to happen, but it does speak to the lack of theological and intellectual rigor of our church in some places.
George, since 2005, Anglican TV has been a thorn in the side to many people. And I would say especially Canon Kenneth Kiernan of the Anglican Communion at Lambeth Palace. He has time and time come against what we've been doing here at Anglican TV. He stopped us from filming something at St. Vladimir's in New York because Rowan Williams is going to be there. He was upset that we showed up at the last Lambeth, which may be the last Lambeth. And he's really been a character in the Anglican community because he works from behind the scenes. I don't think people realize that when stuff comes out of Lambeth, it's not coming from Rowan Williams, but all these new ideas that they see coming out are coming from Canon Kenneth Kiernan.
There's initiatives in other areas like healthcare. There's a pilot project on micro health insurance in Tanzania being sponsored by the Anglican Communion. We'll see where that project goes. That's the work of the gospel, and that's the work of the Anglican Communion.
An unusual statement was released by Kenneth Kieran last week, basically advocating for the continued support for the covenant process. Now, the statement he put out was factually so-so. But even deeper than that is Kenneth Kieran is a bureaucrat. He's not a position, he was not elected by anybody, he has no ecclesial office, he doesn't represent anybody, he's a bureaucrat, yet he is telling churches how to act. He has taken upon himself the authority of the Archbishop of Canterbury, now that Rowan Williams has folded up shop, and has become a trying to become a political force. And that's an extraordinary thing.
Mm-hmm. It's extraordinary in many different ways because our church has always operated in a different polity. We get instruction from our clergy and bishops, and that's how this thing is, the episcopacy is supposed to work. But sometimes there's people underneath the surface that you never see who are actually doing some of the legwork and policy making, and you kind of wonder, well, why would Rowan Williams say that type of thing? Well, he never did. That actually came from the office of a person like Kenneth Kieran.
And the things that, well, I'll offer my commentary at this point now. So flash your little button, Kevin.
Boom, boom, got it.
One of the major reasons why Rowan Williams had a difficult job at Lambeth was because his staff was not loyal or faithful to him. They pursued their own interests at his expense. This is one of those individuals who I believe did so. And whoever becomes the new Archbishop of Canterbury would be well advised to look at how the structures work that are there to support him, rather than to tear him down.
And I would not be offended at all if the new Archbishop cleaned house and hired all new staff at Lambeth. And Kevin, this is so unique to you and George. We've never heard this from anybody else, but I remember George Pritchard saying the same thing, that there was a poison at Lambeth.
Yeah, there's a poison of empire building, of a very dysfunctional bureaucracy that pursues its own interests, not the interests of the communion, and certainly not the interests of Rowan Williams.
No, or Jesus. Welcome to another legal segment with Alan Haley. We're going to talk some Supreme Court stuff. It's interesting because you and I have been paying attention to church stuff for a long time. And with the Episcopal Church, you have to go through legal maneuvers, and nothing happens in days, weeks. It always takes years. And a couple of these churches have reached the final step, and that final step is the U.S. Supreme Court, where you can file petitions. They take about 5,000 petitions a year from not the handwritten ones from criminals, but
they receive those.
Yeah,
about that
they receive 5,000 official petitions from lawyers around the world, mostly in D.C., petitioning for their case to come before the U.S. Supreme Court. But the U.S. Supreme Court only takes about 100, or their court clerks only allow 100 to get to the desk of the the justices.
Well, the thing is, it takes the vote of 4 of the 9 justices to agree to hear a case, and they make that decision in their own conference with no clerks present as to each week that they meet. They go through the newest crop. They have recommendations from various people who've studied the petitions, but they basically just pass around and say, hey, who wants to take this? And if there are 4 of them or more, then they take it.
Well, that's great. Tell me who's going to try this time.
Well, okay, so we have, in chronological order, the first one to file the petition was the Timber Ridge Presbytery of Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And that was a petition to review a decision of the Georgia Supreme Court, which was handed down on the same day that the Georgia Supreme Court handed down its decision in the Christ Church Savannah case. And now Christ Church Savannah has joined and asked the U.S. Supreme Court to review that decision as well. So there are 2 decisions from the Georgia Supreme Court, both on the same day, and both ruling against the parish and in favor of the national denomination, which they've asked the Supreme Court to review. And then joining Christ Church, the same law firm preparing the petition, was Bishop Seabury Church in your own backyard there in Groton, Connecticut. And they, of course, are appealing a decision of the Connecticut Supreme Court handed down last fall, in which the Connecticut Supreme Court reversed a series of its earlier holdings and held the Dennis Canon had to be enforced by Connecticut courts as a unilateral trust, despite what Connecticut law was on that subject beforehand. So all 3 cases are asking the Supreme Court, did Justice Blackmun and you folks really mean what you said in Jones v. Wolfe when you said, of course, if a national church wants to amend its constitution to state a trust, it can easily do so, and such will be given effect by all the courts then they added this little language that everybody ignores, provided that, of course, that it is in legally cognizable form. Well,
Okay, there you go.
As lawyers speak, legally cognizable form. A trust, ordinarily to be legally cognizable, that is to be recognized by a court, has to be signed by the person who owns the property that's being put in trust. If it's not signed by the owner of the property, it's not a trust. And, of course, the Dennis Canon is not signed by the owner of the property. There's not even an individual trust document for all these properties that are claiming to be trusts. So that's why it's back in the lap of the Supreme Court, because of this loose remark by Justice Blackmun about how the courts would be bound to recognize these trust documents. And it's only the Supreme Court can clear this up. It's, as I say, what's happened is the state courts that have read the Jones decision that way have read it to bypass their own state laws, like the statute of frauds, which is a law that says if something's not in writing, it can't be effective to creating interest in real estate. And so if a trust is not in writing, and the quintessential trust that's not in writing is the Dennis Canon, there's no individual trust, as I say, putting each parish property signing its name over to be in trust. So they've read Jones to bypass these state law classical doctrines, and that is kind of creating a federal First Amendment law as pronounced by Justice Blackmun in the Supreme Court. So because they created this federal law, supposedly, quote unquote, they are the ones who have to fix it. And I hope if three petitioners all at the same time pointing to the problems that their decision has created can't do anything about this, why then we're really in for a rough time for church property law.
Well, if 100 out of 5,000 only get taken, I mean, by having three in there, that'll certainly up your odds. Let's talk a little bit about how the Supreme Court works. You get your petition. If you do get your day in court, you show up. The justices are seated around a large, high conference type thing.
Yeah, it's a long high bench. Yeah. You're sitting way down here, and you're looking up at them.
And they give you you or somebody so many moments to argue your case. Then they ask your questions. Right.
Well, actually, they don't even hardly get you started. You can be maybe talking for about a minute at most, and then the justices start peppering you with questions. And you have to be ready to be quick and answer on your feet. I remember the one time I was there arguing a case, and the case ahead of me, I was watching them, pepper this guy, and they asked him a question he didn't like. And he sort of evaded it. And Justice White came back at him and said, no, here's the question. And then he evaded it again. So Justice White finally said, counsel, the question before you is, and he restated it very plainly, and counsel squirmed. And he said, well, I really don't think that question is before this court, with all respect, Your Honor. And Justice White said, it's before you now.
Oh, man. I could just see the people he represents. Oh no, it's over. It's all gone.
That's a rule. What not to do is never try to avoid a question from one of the justices. Yeah. Always meet them and answer them, even if they've seen through the heart of your case and they know that this is a hard question to answer. That's what they want you to see, that your case is not impervious to points that they can make, both pro and con.
Now, does the decision that the Supreme Court here mean they have to go back to trial in the state courts? And what do these decisions mean?
Stage at this point. So we're asking the Supreme Court for review. The Episcopal Church and the Diocese of Connecticut, for example, or the Diocese of Georgia, will have a chance to file an opposition to the petition saying, no, don't grant review. Mm-hmm. And then if they want, the churches can file a short reply to that opposition. And then it will go for a conference with the Supreme Court. My guess is probably, this is March, it'll be April when the opposition's on May. So it'll be toward the end of May or June, early June, if it's put on a conference. And it could possibly get shoved over until the first Monday in October so that we wouldn't know what they're going to do until next October. But in any event, when they come out with their announcement, if they do take it, why then the case will be set for oral argument sometime next year, in the next term, between October and June of 2012, 2013. So it's only when you get set for oral argument, first cert has to be granted, then full briefs are filed on the merits, and then the case is set for oral argument, and you show up and argue it, and then about a month or 2 months later, the court will eventually issue its decision.
Wow. Well, we'll keep this in our prayers, obviously, and even if you retire, you still have to do these commentaries now, because it seems that we're going to be doing a lot of legalese up to the Supreme Court now.
This is going to be an interesting year for legal-wise, because I say that we'll know hopefully by the end of June or maybe in October whether the Supreme Court's going to address this issue. But meanwhile, the Texas Supreme Court has the case there fully briefed, the Fort Worth case. And so they'll be setting that for oral argument. And Texas could well be the first state Supreme Court to issue a decision on whether a diocese can actually lead the Episcopal Church and keep its property.
I want to welcome Peter O to the show. We're going to talk about all things England now. And all things, what's going on in England? We just recently learned that through the Bishop of Oxford and other places that for all intents and purposes, the Covenant, the Anglican Covenant, is a no-go in the Church of England. So what's
the Anglican Covenant is dead in the Church of England.
Okay. Why? I thought that was going to be the one place they could win.
Yeah, I think a number of people took it for granted that the Church of England would pass the Anglican Covenant, given that it's the genius of Rowan Williams, and given that he's our primate, you would think he would do that. Basically, it's gone down because of Section 4. Like, lots of people oppose elsewhere, and lots of people down in the diocese have been impacted by a very effective No to the Anglican Covenant campaign set up about a year ago, and they have basically really briefed well the people in the deanery who have gone to speak to deanery synods and diocesan synods to kind of give each side of the argument, and a lot of people have been unconvinced that what is needed is Section 4 of the Anglican Covenant as it stands. It's essentially a method to discipline provinces, and it seems that doing that isn't what people want.
Now, it's been about probably, I would say Archbishop Rowan knew this 4 or 5, maybe 6 weeks ago. We're just hearing about it now. Is this an effect of why he's stepping down, or is
no, it's not that. This has got nothing to do with it. Him stepping down is because he's been offered these jobs, this job in Cambridge. He's been made Master of Magdalen College. That decision was made about 10 or so days ago, and they needed to get a press release out straight away to say who it was, and therefore Rowan had to announce his resignation at that time. It's got nothing to do with this, though to be fair, he should hang his head in shame a bit over this, because I think what's basically happened is that everybody in the leadership who has wanted the Anglican Covenant to be passed in the Church of England has just assumed it's going to happen. They've just been complacent and thought, you know what, Church of England, they'll do what they're told. It's the Archbishop of Canterbury's territory, and it just hasn't gone like that. And about 6 weeks ago, when we had about a third plus of the diocese having voted, and it all began to see that actually the diocese were voting against it in quite a large proportion, you suddenly got this Yes to Anglican Covenant campaign going, with videos from Bishop of Oxford and Graham King's the Bishop of Sherborne, who we talked about a bit previously, Theological Secretary of Fulcrum, and all these kind of people saying, yes, we should have the Anglican Covenant. It's all just too little, too late.
It is too late. I don't think the Covenant would have the effectiveness they want it to have. I mean, the Covenant is designed to hold everybody together, and I think it in its design it cannot do that.
Well, you know what? In some senses, it's just been superseded by what's going on right now. Just look at the Archbishop of Nigeria, the primate of Nigeria's letter to Rowan that we talked about last week. Okay, if you mean, tell us what you really mean. Just look at that. When you look at the relationship of the provinces with Akusa, you've got about a third to a half who just aren't speaking to them.
Yeah.
They just don't want to know anything about it. So it's almost like we're past the point where a nice covenant that we agree over 4 or 5 years, because there's a lot of people. Well, there are liberals who don't want it because it will mean that somebody will actually smack their hand for once. But the conservatives, especially in places like Nigeria and the Southern Cone and places, look at the covenant. They look at what's gone on for the last 10 years and they go, you know what? Why should we believe that this will do any better than any of the processes so far?
Now,
and so it's doomed.
Yes, it is doomed. Now, how does this affect GAFCON? GAFCON is having a meeting in London in a couple weeks. They're bringing in all the primates and bishops from around the world, Nigeria, Africa, all the different places. They're going to sit down and look at, Archbishop Ron Williams is retiring. The covenant has failed. What can GAFCON do now?
You know what? I reckon GAFCON is just going to happily carry on doing whatever they've done before. GAFCON have wanted the covenant sunk for a while. It's inconceivable that the covenant will live if it's not been passed in the Church of England. GAFCON are going to do what GAFCON are going to do. That's why most of the GAFCON primates didn't turn up to the last primates meeting, because they're like, stop it. Yeah. We're going to do what we're going to do.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you for your time, and it's going to be very interesting to watch how this moves out. And I'm actually going to have to send you some type of camera so we can get on-the-spot coverage at different locations soon.
Yes, the situation now is that the Parliament is now elected, and it is overruled by a majority Muslim Brotherhood and the other Muslim groups. They represent about 20% of the parliament and 30% for the other liberal groups and moderate Muslim groups. And the upper house, like the senators or the House of Lords, we call it the Shura Council. This is now also elected, and the same is happening. So it is dominated by Muslim groups. Now, the next challenge was or is the writing of the Constitution of Egypt. And when the Constitution of Egypt will give a space to every citizen to practice his or her rights and approve of the right of citizenship or not, that is something which we are going to wait and see. But yesterday, the Parliament, as well as the upper house, the Shura Council, decided that 50% of the 100 people who are going to write the Constitution will be from the Parliament and upper house. It means that the majority will be from the Muslim groups. The strong Muslim groups like the Muslim Brotherhood. And the other 50% will be selected by unions, associations, other groups, but must be approved by the Parliament. Again, it is, I think it is a bit unfair that the Parliament control everything, especially at this stage when the Constitution should come expressing every view within Egypt. The Christians, the Muslims, the young, the youth, elder, the women and men, all these groups should be, all these views should be expressed very well in the Constitution.
Is there a danger of Sharia law being the law of Egypt?
I think right now there are two views. The first view is that the Sharia law would be the main source of legislation, but not the legislation itself. So it will not be Sharia law will not be the law. It will be the source of legislation. So it's like a guide for legislation. And that was at the time of Mubarak too. It's not a big problem. And we are happy for this to happen. We don't have objection. Egypt is a majority Muslim, and if they want a guidance from the Sharia, that is okay. But the other view is to apply the Sharia itself with all the laws that was applied in the 15th century, like lashing, cut ban, and all these things, which I don't see a place for it in a place like Egypt, where civilizations, the Roman, the ancient Egyptian, the Coptic, the Islamic, melted together and joined together. It's not easy for this to happen in Egypt itself, because Egypt is unique in its composition.
Was there more safety for Christians under the leadership of Mubarak than there is now?
I think if we looked at the sectarian clashes that happened in 2011, since the revolution happened, it is more frequent than the years before. We should say this. But the obvious things that the Christians were oppressed before, and still no new things happened to them, no new freedom happened to them.
Right.
The Muslim groups, like Muslim Brotherhood, were also oppressed in the past, but now they are reigning, while the Christians were oppressed, but still their situation is the same, if not worse.
Right. Now, recently, this week, Pope Shenouda, who's the Pope of the Orthodox Coptic Church in Egypt, passed away. He was a voice of influence for the Coptic Church. What does this mean now for relationships with the Coptic Christians and Egypt?
I think it will continue the same. There are many bishops ordained by Pope Shenouda who have been his disciples, and they carry his own thoughts and ideology, and I think they will continue. Many of them, or most of them actually, are excellent bishops. So whoever will be chosen will continue the road started by Pope Shenouda, and they will definitely defend the rights of Christians. Pope Shenouda was very concerned about the needs of the Christians in Egypt and also their rights, and he spoke about this, and because of this he was put under house arrest by President Anwar Sadat. I think the people who will come after Pope Shenouda will continue what he started.
Now let's talk also about what's going on in Israel. Jerusalem has having a difficulty with Egypt now because Mubarak had peace agreement with Israel, and the new government says that that deal is no longer, or is that deal still in place?
right now, still the peace agreement between Egypt and Israel is still in place. There are many people who said we need to review this peace agreement, Camp David, and very few say we have to cancel this peace agreement. But I think the majority will say no, because we suffered quite a lot from wars, and I think we are not ready to have any war between us and any other country at the moment, when the financial situation is bad. Also, I think there are many wise people who would say we have to respect all the international agreements that we signed.
Definitely. Well, a lot of the Anglican audience is going to want to know about what they can pray for you. What are your prayer needs in Egypt right now?
Pray for the people of Egypt, because life is not easy for them. The economic situation is very difficult, very, very difficult.
You've lost there's no more tourism.
Yes, tourism is dropped. And remember that 1.5 million young people were working in tourism. And because of lack of security, many companies and factories closed down. So again, many young people are made redundant. So, and the situation is not easy. The church had to try the people who are unemployed, and that is a big problem, and we need to prayer for this. That's the first thing. The second thing, pray, because we are trying to encourage our young people to stay in Egypt and not to immigrate. The immigration is going to be a very difficult situation. I cannot imagine this land, which welcomed Jesus Christ as a baby, and where Jesus lived and grew up and went to the cross and died for us and made many miracles, to be empty of Christians. We don't want to be another Iraq, where about 85% of the Christian in Iraq already left Iraq. It will be a very sad thing. The third thing I want you to pray for is the writing of the Constitution. That the Lord will give wisdom and give grace, so that the people who write the Constitution will affirm the right of citizenship. And finally, I would like to pray for education, because education is the key for the development of Egypt. We have schools, and we don't know how this will continue, but pray for us, and pray in the midst of all this for the witness of the church.
George, last story of the day is St. Paul's Cathedral in London, England, and the new rector, David Islow. Now, David Islow, being the new rector of St. Paul's, is going to go out and do some interviews, because St. Paul's has had a torrid history of the last 6 months because it had Occupy Londoners in its courtyards. And the other guy was shown the door. So David goes on to the Times and says, listen, St. Paul's is going to be a new type of cathedral. We're going to allow same-sex blessings. Really, the reason I'm doing this is because bishops allow us to do more pastoral care, and marriage is an ever-changing, evolving thing, and we're going to open it up to more places and more people. And George, what a difference a day makes in England.
Isn't it surprising? You can tell the Times one thing on Friday, not Friday, and when you're interviewed by the BBC on Sunday, you're a different man. He was interviewed on the Sunday program, which is a religious affairs program on BBC Radio 4. And he was asked the same question about would he perform gay marriages. And he seemed to be a different David Eisen. He said, well, I only did one when I was at Bradford, and that was a blessing of a civil partnership in the context of accessing God's peace for them. So no, I really didn't do all these gay things that I said I did. And second, there is no such thing as gay marriage. The Church of England doesn't allow it, and I wouldn't do it because it's not allowed, and the bishop would have to give his permission for me to do it anyway. So this guy ran totally away from what he said to the Times.
Which is why I want to endorse the Bishop of London for the next Archbishop of Canterbury. Obviously, there was a phone call. Well, actually, I would bet there was a person-to-person meeting that really changed David's mind. Tell me a little bit about the Bishop of London, George.
Richard Charters is a very cerebral, very academic, intellectual fellow, not airy-fairy like Rowan Williams, but still very, very bright. He's also quite conservative, quite traditionally minded. And because of that, he is going to have all sorts of bricks thrown at him if he's going to be considered for the Archbishop of Canterbury. Because he is a traditionalist, he is a conservative, he does not ordain women to the priesthood. He has his assistants do that for him. And he's against women bishops. So on all the major issues, all the strikes are against him as far as the chattering classes are concerned. But he is a sound theological bishop.
And he's willing to take the chance and call somebody in their office and take him to task when they go outside the bounds of Christendom. And
now the one thing, though...
Go ahead.
Sorry. The one thing, though, that we need to keep in mind is that he is 3 years older than Rowan Williams. So he's going to be 65 shortly, and he can stay till he's 72. So that's 7 years. That's a good long stretch if he wants to do the job. But I don't think Rowan Williams really was going to step down in place for an older man to take his job.
No, and it's really, we're going to go through this whole process of finding the next Archbishop, but there's nothing anybody outside of America can say. But I did learn last week, somebody told me you don't have to be from England to be the Archbishop. Is that true, George? They can nominate anybody?
Rowan Williams is not from England.
I don't think he's from the planet, but yes. Obviously, they want to keep it within the human species, but basically, if somebody wanted to nominate Archbishop Venables or Robbie, they could be nominated into the process.
Well, as the saying goes, hell will freeze over first.
Yes, it will.
But you're correct. They do not need to be confined to the current members of the Church of England's House of Bishops.
Oh, my God. All right, that's the end of episode 34 with Anglican Unscripted. George and I really thank you for watching. It's really neat that we have this opportunity to speak to you about the news and events and give our opinion and news analysis. But it doesn't just stop here. You can contact us throughout the week. I'm putting on the bottom of the screen how to reach George on Facebook and Twitter and how to reach me on Facebook and Twitter. Next week, like I said before, once a month we're going to read from our mailbag. We get lots of mail, lots of great comments, lots of people giving us hints of new news and stuff like that. And we get a chance next week to read it. What do we really want to know, George, in the mailbag for this week?
Well, there's several different things, suggestions, comments, ways to improve the program. But I personally I've received several emails asking me questions about not just historical points, what happens when, but why am I so upbeat and positive about the Anglican way? And I like to talk about that because, being a Christian is a wonderful thing.
Yes, it is.
And the Anglican way is a wonderful way in worshiping our Lord. And a lot of bad things are out there in the press, and we've talked about some silly stuff today of screwy deans in England and all this and that. But really, God is doing great things, and I like to talk about that.
Yeah, and I do too. I love being a Christian. I love having a relationship with Christ, and I love how Christianity is presented in the form of Anglicanism. Anglicanism is a mess, and somehow somehow that's appealing.
It's a mess, but at the same time, Kevin, I'm a happy person and I'm an Anglican. Why? Because Christ is my Savior.
Good, I thought
We shouldn't be so down and negative all the time.
no, we shouldn't. I thought you were going to say pharmaceuticals. I'm glad you said Jesus.
I don't have health insurance, so it better be Jesus. Cover the ward. It's not real stage makeup.
That's all right. Anything that makes you look better.
We have a friend.
She give me some of the dead body makeup.
We have a friend who from church who is a hairdresser, and on the side she does the makeup for dead bodies for open caskets.
Yes.
And so Susan was
maybe
suggesting
use some of that makeup.
they could use some of that makeup.
Yeah, little resurrection makeup.
Do a zombie show. There, I think that's a little less shiny.
Do you want to do Kevin now? Or?
Yeah, a little dab will do you. Thank you. All right, let me turn my light on here.
Are you ready to record?
It's already on. It's already on.
It's recording now?
It's recording.
Oh, great.
Hey, we always
Don't
need.
play that as a blooper, Kevin.
We get. I needed a blooper. You got me a blooper.